Good morning, and welcome to our Sunday morning Bible study.
Yeah, Sunday morning. New
Jacob,
for us.
Yeah, we've done the evening show for so long, and the network decided that they wanted to bring us up for the higher ratings in the morning.
That's right. They needed some strength in the morning.
That's right.
So
that's right.
They moved us up.
So all joking aside, with us starting back, trying to get together more at the building, having worship services on Sunday night, we're going to have a departure from the norm for our Sunday evening Bible class.
Right.
We are going to have Sunday morning recorded lessons up for you so that you might be able to have a bit of a Sunday morning Bible class experience.
Yeah, and we're going to premiere those like Steve does on Wednesday nights at 6:30. The Bible class will premiere at 8 o'clock. So we know the 8 o'clock service people, you'll be here, but it will be available for you like you normally would a Bible class. When you get home, you can pull it up and it'll be there. And then those of you who come to the 10 o'clock, you can begin to watch it at 8 o'clock. But it will be available on the YouTube channel after that. Mm-hmm. And our Kids Connection, we don't want to throw that away since we're not being able to have Bible classes right now. It'll premiere at 9 o'clock. It's usually about 15 minutes, so you should be able to watch that and have plenty of time to get to the building for worship at 10.
So hopefully you're kicked back with a cup of coffee and a donut, and either you've just come back from the 8 o'clock service or you're preparing to go to the 10 o'clock service, and you can spend some time with us studying God's Word and have that kind of Bible class environment until such time that we can actually get back together.
Right. This Sunday, I just want to real quick let you know, this Sunday night will be our senior banquet. So at the building, it will only be those participating in the senior banquet, seniors and their families. But we will have a Devo as normal, and that will be live streamed starting at 5 o'clock. After that, we'll do a little break, and then we'll begin the senior banquet, which is also going to be live streamed on this channel tonight, so you will know that you can't be here to celebrate with them, but you'll be able to watch the slideshow and all those things if you want to celebrate our seniors. We'll also be at 3:30. They're going to set their tables up outside like we typically do with baby showers and wedding showers recently. So you can drive around, give them a gift, let them know that you're proud of them, all those things. So Sunday's going to be a big day with a lot of stuff going on, and we're excited that we're able to kind of get a few things going on while still practicing social distancing and all those things. But we're excited for our seniors and being able to do that. And then the next week on Sunday nights,
August the
16th, we will begin having PM worship as long as everything stays safe. Like all this is kind of fluid, but we are going to try to start having, that'll also be streamed on the YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. But at 5 o'clock, do our normal PM worship time.
Yep. So Jacob, it's been a minute since I taught a Sunday morning Bible class.
It's been a while.
But let's get into it. So if you've been with us on Sunday nights, we've been working through Ecclesiastes. We're going to continue to work through that study for the next 2 weeks. So tonight we're going to attempt to get through chapters 7 through 9. We'll see how much debate comes in there and slows us down.
Hopefully.
But if you would, look in your Bibles, Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And we're going to begin reading with verse 1. A good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this also is futility. And we're going to stop right there and have a little bit of discussion on that.
You know, when we started this study on Ecclesiastes, one of the things that Jake really pointed out that was really important is you can read Ecclesiastes and Solomon can just seem like a huge downer, right? Like he can seem so pessimistic and just have a negative viewpoint, and it can really bring you down. But what you said, Jake, and I'll let you kind of talk about it a little more, is that's all in what we're perceiving, because I don't think that's actually what Solomon's trying to do, right? Mm-hmm. And he's trying to, be real with us.
Right. So often when we read making a generalization here.
Yeah.
But I feel like so often when I read Ecclesiastes, it's easy to look at it strictly through the physical. And so, you imagine if you're having a conversation with somebody and somebody walks up and says, hey, you know what? The day of your death's better than the day of your birth anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you would take that as being a very, negative,
Yeah.
Sorrowful comment.
Right.
But Solomon, through all of this, through all of his experiences, is focused so much beyond what's physical and what's here and what's right now.
Right.
And much the same way that Paul communicates to us in Philippians, he understands that there is something greater waiting. There is something better than the pursuits of this life, than continuing to seek after money and fame and glory and all of the vain things that he's described so many times.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's why when you read this and you read a statement like, the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth, and we so celebrate births, right? And they're wonderful things, they're miraculous, and not taken away from them. But Solomon understands that there's also a lot of sorrow and heartache and trouble that comes throughout one's life. But the glory that waits at the end of one's life is far greater than what can be experienced here.
So you would say, we so often are focused what's wanted in us while we're alive, right? But would you say that we're wanted dead or alive? Is that what he's saying? So
I don't even have anything for that.
So just as we're kind of starting out, like Jake said, this idea of looking at death being greater than birth, mourning being better than laughter, all these things can seem like he wants us to be sad all the time. He wants us to only, really focus in on these things that make us sorrowful or mourning. I don't think that's what he's trying to do.
Do we have to carry a sad face so that we may be happy?
Okay, yeah.
Verse 3. So I'll tell you a quick story. So some people don't know this about me, but as a kid, I was very antisocial. I was very serious. I've got they're best friends of mine, brothers. I met them when I was 5 in a preschool class. And they knew me as the kid that never smiled.
Yeah.
They went home and told their mom, and we're great friends to this day, but they went home and told their mom, hey, we met a kid who never smiled, and that was me. So according to Solomon, I might have had the most happy heart possible because I had a sorrowful face. At least that's how they perceived it. Now, truth be told, I just didn't want to be away from home.
Yeah.
And I didn't like the kids I was with, right, because I was intimidated by them. But that's not exactly what it is Solomon is describing, that we walk around carrying a sad countenance to make ourselves happy.
And, it's something similar, Paul touches on this a little bit in Romans 8, and there's a few different places of, weep with those who weep, and it's important to do those things. Solomon referenced it in chapter 3, right? And in the timing of, there's a time for this, a time for that. Now, him saying that it's better is usually, I think, what gets us. And like you referenced verse 3, Jake, sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. And when I read that, in the context of what comes next, right? And we'll look at that in a second. But in the context, I don't feel like he's saying you need to be sad. Your goal should be to be sad. I think what he's saying is whenever you're sad, make sure you be sad because that's the only way your heart is going to be healthy, right? We often look at different versions of the Bible and what it has to say. One we don't use very often around here is the Message, because we know it's a transliteration. Actually, I don't even know what you would call it. It's a translation of a translation of a it's someone putting a translation into their own words, right? So we don't use it a lot for our deep Bible studies,
right.
But sometimes it's really good how he decided to phrase things. 'Cause as Americans, it helps us with the language and understanding, and so. Verse 3 of chapter 7, this is how the Message reads. Crying is better than laughing. It blotches the face, but it scours the heart. And when you think about that, there's a couple of words in there that we're not used to, right? But it blotches the face. Yes, mourning and crying can make your face seem like everything is bad, right? But what that's actually doing is scouring your heart or deep cleansing your heart. And that's the only way in those moments that you're going to be able to be healthy and move forward is if you allow yourself to mourn in those times.
Yeah. And I like that word scour. We use that most often in the context of like scrubbing bubbles in a tile shower.
Right.
You're getting that soap scum off your shower wall, but allowing ourselves to experience those emotions and to be healed by them, to be cleansed by them, as opposed to what he seems to hold up in antithesis are those people who constantly seek after joy and laughter, even to their detriment, because they're letting it push down and hide some real emotion that needs to be dealt with.
So, I'm a fan of the Enneagram, right? And we even talked about how Solomon is probably most likely a 7. And maybe one of the reasons he's referencing this is because one thing with 7s on the Enneagram is they stay away from anything that's going to bring them fear or sadness. Right? They just stay away from it. They push it down, they get away from it, and put on this face of everything's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay, I'll be fine, I'm just not going to focus on it, I'll push that, I'm not going to deal with that yet, I can push it down the road, I'm just not going to focus on it. And Solomon's saying, look, if you do that, you're never going to be happy. Your heart's never going to be what it needs to be, because in order for you to grow, in order for your heart to be cleansed, you have to deal with the things that make you sorrowful. Which is what he kind of continues to describe in the verses following.
Yeah,
right?
so verse 7 is where we left off. For oppression makes a wise man mad, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why is it the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Wisdom along with an inheritance is good, and an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. Consider the work of God, for who is able to straighten what he has bent? In the day of prosperity be happy, but in the day of adversity consider, God has made one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. So tell everybody why you laughed, Jacob.
This idea, so the saying, why is that the former days were better than these in verse 10? How many times do we hear that? The good old days, right? And Steve did a lesson on it a couple of weeks ago, right? Of looking at that mindset of, if things were just the way they were back then. That we so often forget the problems of back then. Like there were serious things going on back then that weren't great, but as we distance ourselves from them, we forget and allow oftentimes the same things to happen to us in the future because we didn't recognize and deal with it back then.
Yep. Yeah. I've been looking forward to getting just to this verse for weeks in this study, and then Steve, I'll say, stole my thunder, took away maybe my opportunity to really belabor the point.
Yeah.
This is always, and Jacob and I, for those of you who don't know, we have a long relationship with one another. We've known each other for years and have had a lot of conversations. And this is a conversation we come back to a lot because it's a sticking point for both of us. It's this idea that we romanticize the past, and that holds us back in our present and in looking at our future, because we so often want to cling to the things that were familiar to us that maybe we don't remember the dark sides of.
Yeah.
I'll quote my grandmother here, as I've said many times. She had a saying that she said, Jake, there were no good old days.
Yeah.
She said, now is the good old days. This being a woman who grew up coming out of the Depression and experienced World War and all that went on with it. And she recognized, even in her advanced age, that what we were living in was the best of times that she had experienced.
Well, and as Christians, and I think even to Solomon's point here, one important thing to realize with that is, for people who say that, to millennials and Generation Z who are here now, what's the difference between back then and now? Them. So obviously you're saying that they are the problem, right? Like, it was better back then because you guys weren't here yet.
Kids these days.
They're terrible,
Yeah.
right? But when we do that, how does that sound anything like a Christian should claim? Like, it's not bad to remember the days and how good they were, but don't say that they are so much, and I think that's what Solomon's saying, don't say that those days were so much better. Be present in what you have today and deal with it and make it good.
Because Solomon's generation was looking at the generations behind them or coming behind and saying, "Oi, kids, that's gone on for millennia."
Which is funny, right? Because as we talked about in the early chapters, they're prospering right now. Like it's the greatest times right now. Like they've got all the money in the world they could need, and people are still saying, "Yeah, man, it was way back. It was so much better."
Yeah.
When they're walking through the wilderness, man, it was so much better when they were beating us as slaves and making us do all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we forget these terrible things just because it's not what's happening right now.
Right.
We
Yeah.
don't
I
want
mean,
to deal with what's right.
Solomon's contemporaries and the generation before him followed his dad around in all of these battles.
Yeah.
Right. That was hard. I mean, even though God was with them, that was tough.
Had to hide in caves like for days and all those.
And
kind of
yet
things.
Solomon is still familiar with this idea of people saying, well, those good old days,
Yeah.
those days gone by when he's living. And again, as we pointed out last week for the children of Israel, these were the good old days for them.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, these were the best of times that he's living in. Again, see, I told you, it's a little bit of a soapbox for me, and I said I wasn't going to spend much time on it, and here we are. Another few things to pull out of what we just read. Of course, he continues this line of thought on emotion, right? He had talked about sorrow and laughter and joy, and he gets into verses 8 and 9 talking about don't be quick to be angry. So he links too much laughter and pursuit of just physical happiness. He links that to foolishness. He also links being too quick to be angry to foolishness, right? To not using that wisdom. And he says wisdom is protection just as money is protection, verse 12, and that knowledge is an advantage to those who have it. So his argument here, much in line with what he says in the rest of Ecclesiastes and in Proverbs as well, is that wisdom is the thing that we should grasp for because it keeps us out of so many other problems, right? It makes us slow to anger. It helps us to understand how to relate to people, he's going to get into a minute how to stay in line with the king and not bring sorrow on yourself because you don't live in accordance with the king. Ties that to wisdom as well. And so he spends a lot of time on that because it's obviously something that's near and dear to his heart, of course, the wisdom of Solomon.
Definitely.
Let's look at verse 15. I have seen everything during my lifetime of futility. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. Do not be excessively righteous, and do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Do not be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before the time? It is good that you grasp one thing, and also not let go of the other. For the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. Also, do not take seriously all the words which are spoken, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others.
There's so many things that jump out to me in that, and I guess the main thing is this idea of, wicked, a righteous man's life can perish, and a wicked man can prolong his life with wickedness. So many times, and I think maybe one of the main points Solomon is speaking to, is that we're so scared of death. Like death is built to be a negative thing for us. A lot of times during these times, people felt like you probably did something wrong if you were to die, right?
Yep.
And he's saying that's not the thinking we have. Righteous people should be friends with death, right? It should be their friend. It shouldn't be their enemy. It's the wicked people that should be afraid of death. And what they usually do is continue wickedness so they can prolong because they're so scared of it. They want to stay away from it. Where a righteous man, it's not that he wants to die, but he's friends with death. He's not scared of it. He can embrace it. And that's what knowledge of God brings, according to Solomon.
Yep. And he actually gets more into that, how wickedness and righteousness manifest themselves in our lives. He gets into that more in chapter 8. So we'll look at that in a little more detail in just a minute. I also want to note, and again, it's one thing that attracts me to Solomon is his practical wisdom. There's a lot of practicality to what he says.
Definitely.
His comments in verses 21 and 22. How real world is that for all of us? That we have at times had people disparage us behind our backs, have people talk negatively about something that we've done or something that we stand for, and it hurts us, right? And we get upset about it, and we don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And Solomon says, don't dwell too much on those things because you've done the same thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, don't dwell too much on those things because it's all vanity, it doesn't matter. He says, you go and do the same thing to other people. He's not justifying it. He's not, saying, keep doing it.
Yeah, it's just...
Or it's okay, right? But he is saying, don't take it to heart too bad because you have done the exact same thing to somebody else, but you don't see it that way through your lens because you're the one talking about that person.
Right. And Jesus would go on to say, remove the plank before you realize that you have, that's Jesus' way of saying, realize what you're doing. Realize that you've done the same thing. So be slow to anger in this situation and try to be more understanding because that's where we're at. Where did we get to there?
Let's look at verse 23. I tested all this with wisdom and said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. What has been is remote and exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? I directed my mind to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and an explanation, and to know the evil and folly and foolishness of madness. And I discovered more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains. One who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. But behold, I have discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I am still seeking but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I have not found a woman among all these. Behold, I have only found this, that God made men upright, and they have sought out many devices. So, to me, this stretch of Scripture is pretty fascinating, because Solomon, as he's kind of wrapping up his previous thoughts we just looked at, he says, look, I've tested all this with wisdom, and I can't find out so much. It's mysterious. We read last week how Solomon talks about that God has put eternity into the heart of man,
right.
and man can't figure out what God has done from beginning to end. This idea that there are things that are going to be mysterious to us that we can't figure out. But it's interesting where he takes it, because he's saying, look, I investigated all of this with my wisdom and my knowledge, and here's what I've discovered. And what he discovered is that all the women that he had brought into his life were causing him distress, heartache, and leading him away from God, right? Because it's interesting that he points this out. He says, the righteous, or verse 26, the one who is pleasing to God will escape from her. Her being this woman whose heart is snares and nets and who is trying to encapture or use. He says, the one who's pleasing to God will escape for her, but the sinner will be captured by her. Well, Solomon was captured by the same type of woman. We read, recorded for us in 1 Kings chapter 11, and this is verse 1 beginning. 1 Kings chapter 11 says, but King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their other gods. Now, it says Solomon held fast to these in love. So the same Solomon who's telling us, have wisdom and have knowledge, because it will preserve your life in a spiritual sense, not preserve you physically, but will help you spiritually. He's not holding to the same wisdom that he's been given from God.
Right.
Because God said these women will surely, these people, but these women, if you marry with them, will surely lead your heart away from God, and he doesn't do that. And that passage goes on to list the wives and concubines that Solomon had, and how they did indeed lead him to worshiping idols and away from worshiping the one true God. So it's interesting in reading this, his perspective on women who will ensnare you in a trap, and he found himself in life in the same situation.
And you know what that tells me? And let me explain this statement after I say it. Don't jump on me quick. But not many things have changed. Because either way, whether it be a man seeking a woman or a woman seeking a man, obviously from the times of Solomon to now, we're told that's what's going to bring us joy. That's what's going to bring us completeness. That's what's going to bring us all these things, is this relationship with this woman. We find the perfect one that has all the things that are going to give you the pleasures that you want. That's your goal to get to. Mm-hmm. But what he says is oftentimes when that becomes your goal, everything else around your life is going to start falling apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, thank you for pointing that out. Not just women, from his perspective, it was the women that had ensnared his heart.
Exactly.
It's just as possible the other direction, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're reading Solomon, so he's talking personally
Right.
in that, as you just pointed out.
Right. Let's look at chapter 8, verse 1. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him what will happen? No man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or the authority over the day of death, and there is no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. All this I have seen and applied in my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt.
This is something, obviously, Paul talks about as well on a level of this idea of rulers and how we deal with the earthly rulers, right? And I think you might have pulling up Paul's words on this.
Yeah, so what Jacob's talking about is found in Romans chapter 13, where, again, we consider the people that Paul is writing to people under Roman rule.
Which is different, right, than Solomon speaking here, because right now the people are under his rule.
Right, which subsequently is under the rule of God, right? Now, obviously God used the Roman kingdom,
right?
So you could say you're under the will of God, and Paul argues that. But at the same time, it was not a ruling government that was holding up God as being someone to be praised and worshiped and served. But Romans chapter 13, verse 1, every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation for themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will receive praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. And we'll stop right there. The next time you are driving down the road and a police officer gets behind you and you immediately get nervous, right? You're not doing anything wrong, but you immediately 10 and 2,
right?
Signals. Think about verse 3 of Romans chapter 13, right? You don't have to be in fear if you're doing what's right. Now, we read that example because it's much in line with what Solomon's saying in chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes, and that is, follow the king, live at peace with the rulers that God has put into place. He says, don't go against him because he has all authority. Now, that's with a caveat, and Jacob's got an example for the caveat of going against a king that God has put in place.
And yes, I do, and I'm going to get there in just a minute, but just speaking to what you just said, which is true, in Paul's words there of, if you're doing what is right, you don't have anything to worry about. Obviously, we know that sometimes things happen to where you're doing everything right and government can still cause things to happen. Paul is talking here about your relationship with God. Like if you're doing what's right, your relationship with God is not going to have anything happen to it, no matter what happens, which goes into what he's talking about here. Because there's so many examples we could look at as we were going through the Old Testament of the kids' connection. Joseph and Daniel kept having these things happen to them that were out of their control. They were doing what was right, but because someone saw that didn't believe in the same God they did, not doing what they wanted them to do, they suffered consequences for it. But whatever the situation was, it didn't change the way that they reacted to God. They still submitted. They didn't cause uproars. They didn't do those things in the government. But they held fast to what they were supposed to do. And I guess the big one that comes to mind always is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? In Daniel chapter 3. Because you have this moment where these men are not bowing down as they're supposed to, which we know Daniel's not bowing down either, but he's a little too high up. These people are not. So they bring him before the king, gets built up, all these things. And the most interesting thing that I think drives this point home to how you act and how you act to authority on earth and how you react in comparison to authority to God is they look at him and Nebuchadnezzar says, unless you do this, you're going into this fiery furnace. And they look at him and they simply say, and I'll let Jake read it word for word in a minute, but they say, no matter, we serve the Lord our God, nothing you can do can change our minds. You could throw us into the fire, God will save us. But the one that always, the verse that's just so powerful is, even if God doesn't deliver us from this, we're still going to do what is right.
So we're going to test Jacob's ability to recite Scripture. So this is Daniel chapter 3, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They acknowledged the fact. They said, look, our God is able, but it's not necessary that he's going to do it. Not necessarily the case that he is going to do it. He says, they say, but beside the point, we're still not going to do what you ask, because we would rather suffer a death in a fiery furnace knowing that there's a God waiting for us who loves us than bow down and worship.
Which, in going back to Ecclesiastes, the end of 7 going into 8, they just mesh so well because Solomon is essentially saying what we just said, is don't be scared of death to the point that it changes the way that you react, the way that you act, the way that... And understand that sometimes doing what is right will cause problems for you with your earthly government. Don't give them a reason, right? Don't give them a reason to do it. But more than anything, don't give God a reason to be disappointed. To where you make God feel like you don't trust him to deliver you whatever the situation is.
And it's a perfect segue because we're going to keep looking at the rest of chapter 8. Verse 10 says, So then I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did thus. This too is futility, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly. Therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, for he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. Let me keep going. Let me finish out this thought. There is futility which is done on earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say this too is futility. So he gets into this idea, and we'll spend a little bit more time on it. I alluded to this a minute ago. He goes in the first part of the chapter about talking about obeying rulers, kings, earthly powers, and how that benefits us. And he ends the thought out by talking about obeying God.
Right.
Now, he does not in any way argue that obeying God benefits us physically.
Right.
Right? What's he say? He says a wicked man may lengthen his days in his wickedness. He may perform wicked acts 100 times over and lengthen his life. And you, as a righteous man, may suffer what you think the deeds of a wicked man would cause him to suffer.
Yeah.
We sing a song, and full disclosure, Jacob, I've never liked the song.
Okay.
I have this idea, I feel like it can be a little whiny.
Yeah.
And it's the song Farther Along, if you know the song. And the song says, tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living around us, never molested, though in the wrong. Now, my difficulty with that song, though it is a pretty song, and I think it shares a message that's worth hearing.
Yeah.
My difficulty with that song is it sounds like we are holy,
Yeah.
singing about the people who are not holy.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
We deserve better in life than all of these other people who are not. You see where I take it sounds a little
Similar to Jonah, similar to Elijah.
A little
bit. I've been doing all this whole time. Why would you let this happen to me?
A little bit.
Yeah,
a
definitely.
little bit. Lord God, thank you for
Why
not
aren't you
letting
doing
me.
that to them that aren't following you? I'm the one doing right.
Right. Now that being said, as a purpose of example, now the next time somebody leads farther along, I'm going to hear about it. Right?
You are, yeah.
But-
we probably got messages coming in right now.
Probably.
actually.
But that as an example of what Solomon is saying here, he says, look, you may live an almost perfectly righteous life, though he acknowledges that no man lives a perfect life. And you may be, as the song says, molested, right? Given hardship for it. You may never experience an easy day because of the way that you live your life. But Solomon's argument the whole time is the spiritual focus and not the physical focus. So again, in chapter 8, the first part is the physical focus on obeying the king and how that benefits us spiritually. And the second part of chapter 8 is the focus on how we spiritually obey God and how that benefits us spiritually. In neither case does he really argue that either one is going to benefit us long term physically.
Yeah.
That sounded
perfect.
muddy
No,
to me.
that's perfect. Clear.
Verse 15. So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and drink and to be merry. And this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. When I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has been done on earth, even though one should never sleep day or night, and I saw every work of God, I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover. And though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover.
I like laborious.
Laboriously, right?
Yeah.
I don't really know how that, where that came out. Again, Solomon, with this idea of the things of God can't always be discovered in our lifetime. And that's where our faith in God and what God is doing and has done comes into play.
Without a doubt. And I think, as we wrap up for this morning, just as you can see, Solomon's concept of what he's trying to get through to us in 7 and 8 is the idea of not to be afraid a little bit of death, because death can be your ally almost. If you don't fear it, if you allow God to be your leader, even when bad things happen, it's not going to affect you in the same way because you understand who is in control and you're following what you can do to get there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you recall from what we said earlier, we had intended to get through chapter 9.
Yeah.
But I put in the caveat, right?
You did.
Depends
You did.
on how much good debate we have in
Right.
7 and 8. I felt like it was good. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this Bible study. Again, we welcome feedback or comments. And just remember, we're changing things up right now.
Yeah.
Watch for your emails. Look at the bulletin and the monthly mail out. Make sure you're in line with us on what's going on. With tonight's going to be the senior banquet, right? That's going to be live streamed.
Right.
And then starting the 16th, we're going to be at the building on Sunday nights. But Jacob and I will be available for this Bible class Sunday mornings. Jacob and Daniel with Kids Connection, much the same, but on Sunday mornings.
And for those of you who are at 8 o'clock this morning, it was good seeing you. For those who are coming at 10, we'll see you in just about an hour.
Absolutely. Love you guys.